Welcome to today's webinar, Agribusiness and the Traceability of Fresh Produce. I'm Monique Fenech from Australasian Supply Chain Institute, and thanks for joining us. Just a quick technical check to make sure everyone can hear. Can you raise your hand if you can hear me? Thank you all. That's fantastic. And the agenda for today's webinar is a welcome and an update and a market update from Michael Page before a great keynote from Luke Wood, CEO of Escavox. There'll be a Q&A discussion time at the end and also some polls during the session just to keep this lively and really interactive as we go through the content. So please feel free to join in. To start with, let me introduce Barbara Schless. Barbara has 5 years of experience with Michael Page, both in Australia and in the Netherlands, and recruits for supply chain and logistics. She works with large retailers, FMCGs, logistics and healthcare organisations, and she actively shares market knowledge with those clients, helping to define job descriptions and interacting with both their HR and line management. I'll now ask Barbara to unmute herself and show her face on the screen and share some market update with everyone. Thanks, Barbara.
Thank you for the introduction, Monique. Good afternoon, everyone. One of the questions that I receive a lot these days is how can I successfully apply for a job when there's over 300 applicants? And it's a very high topic that comes up these days. One of our directors at Page gave a presentation around this topic a couple of weeks ago, and I would like to summarize the highlights to you today. It might seem as the basics, but looking at a cover letter, a resume, and your online brand are the 3 pillars to apply successfully for a role. We recommend that a cover letter is please only submit a cover letter if it's required, if people are asking for it. What should you put in a cover letter? There's a couple of things that gives you a great opportunity to write a cover letter, and that is to explain your experience, give a view about your skills, tell the company why it is that you are a fit for the role, and mainly link this to their needs and wants. What is it that they are looking for? It might be that you do have the experience. One of the key tips I'm always giving, make sure it's there in the resume. It is difficult to summarize your entire life and work experience in 3 pages. We recommend to keep the resume always to 3 pages. So you might want to change a couple of the wordings or a couple of the wordings for the job if you're applying for a different role. If you look at the online branding, that gets bigger and bigger. LinkedIn is the key social branding at the moment that's being used for job applications. I would highly recommend, if you're not using LinkedIn yet, to start using it actively. Make sure you have a photo up there, people see who you are, a summary, what your job is, what your core responsibility is, and your added value to a company. A lot of time I speak to people and they say, yes, I do have LinkedIn. I work with LinkedIn, but I haven't updated to my latest role. The opportunity with LinkedIn is growing and growing. People are sharing market knowledge. There's information out there. It's myself, I'm sharing a lot of market updates. I know Page Group is doing as well. ASCI is sharing great articles, webinars, everything. And it's a really great platform to connect with professionals. Because looking for a job is not something you only do on job boards, but it's mainly the networking and your connections that you have through different events. Bringing me actually to the next point for ASCI. Everybody here most of you might be an ASCI member, and once logged in on the ASCI webinar, on the ASCI website, apologies, there's the opportunity to create a profile and make it as well a public, which gives other professionals the opportunity to find you. I would definitely recommend adding that. And the same for the Michael Page website. While having a profile out there, it's easier to find, for people to find you if you're looking for a new job. I'm looking after temporary and contracting roles. If you're immediately available, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help you and have a chat on further details on the market. Also, if you're looking for a new role and I'm not available, of course, happy to connect you with my my colleagues. So feel free to do that, to speak in a bit more detail on if you have any questions. Now the market is getting better. We see more and more roles. And then my question is to you, are you hiring in the next 3 months? Are you looking to add new people to your team? And I would be keen to brainstorm on that as well. So thank you, Monique, for putting up the poll. I guess we'll give it a couple of minutes till people have the opportunity to answer.
Yeah, thanks so much, Barbara. And it's a really valuable lesson to constantly be reminded that, yes, you need an online brand, and that the things that you are doing online is certainly being reviewed by potential employers. So keep mindful of that in everything that you post, and keep it professional. And yeah, that's going to work in your favor. All right, let's launch this poll, Barbara, and you can talk to the findings there.
Yeah. So for my first reaction seeing this is I'm very keen to see that people are hiring again. That is what we're noticing in the market, especially a lot of temporary and contracting roles. Nobody knows where the market is going. I think compared to a couple of months ago that we did this poll, it was definitely the opposite. So yeah, it's happy to see. Again, any questions, feel free to reach out to me either at the Q&A session or at the end of the webinar. Thank you for your time, Monique.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Barbara. And moving on, some really exciting news now about ASCI 2021 is our conference coming up, and we'd really like for you to consider nominating your organisation. And I've just popped up in the chat box the link to a really great video that the awards director has put together. It outlines each of the awards categories, the criteria that the judges are looking for, but also some success from some previous winners of these awards and what they did in their application to make it stand out and look really appealing. So if you are going to put the time into the 1,000 words submission, yes, I said 1,000 words, then definitely head over and check out this short webinar just to make sure that you're across what's required. I'm sure you've all seen this slide by now, which is based on the SCORE reference model. It's the certification offerings in our continued professional development program. And today I'm just going to touch briefly on the red one, which is the CSCP, since today's topic is so focused on the end-to-end supply chain. So when you look at the CSCP certification from APIX, you'll see that it covers off quite a range of really broad topics that involves third parties outside your internal organisation. And APIX did a salary survey pre-COVID earlier this year. And from their survey, they found that 21% of the respondents receive a higher pay when they have a certification compared to those who didn't. And just to Barbara's point about really making yourself stand out, if you do have a certification, then that's certainly in your favour. So I wanted to give you a bit more detail around the CSCP and what it can do for your career. I actually looked into 4 people on LinkedIn who have studied the CSCP, and also talked to APIX in the US about what it was that made these people stand out, and worked with them on creating this piece of information for you. It was a good exercise, and I turned it into a blog, which I'm happy to share with you all, with the links to their their LinkedIn profiles. Arslan is now working for GSK as the Global Supply Chain Manager in Pakistan. And after his CSCP, he created a really great dashboard for senior management, just because he had the confidence in the visibility across the end-to-end supply chain. When we consider Maria has used the CSCP to understand more deeply how to collaborate with external parties. She's now the head of purchasing at a Chinese automotive manufacturer in Germany. Cuban was also successful in his career after studying the CSCP. He now works for a biscuit manufacturer as the finance manager in South Africa. And again, he's really honed in on the finance aspects to the CSCP certification. And lastly, Nate. Nate is from Michigan in the US, and he works for Jeep Grand Cherokee as their senior programs manager. And he's seen some great, organizational outcomes to studying his certification through cost savings and some real impacts to the bottom line. So I hope that's been helpful. And if you are keen to study CSCP by yourself without classes, it's totally doable. One of our members in Melbourne, Andrew Hill, has recently also written a blog about how he did that. So I'll share a couple of blog links with you once the presentation kicks off. Now to introduce our keynote, Luke Wood. Luke is Chief Executive Officer and founder at Escavox. Luke's held some senior level roles in supply chain management, innovation, designing and deploying emerging technology to remove waste and inefficiency from supply chains, something that's all close to our hearts, ranging from retail warehouse systems to oil field asset control. He began his career in the food industry with UK retailer Sainsbury, spending a few years consulting to Australian retailers before venturing into supply chain management in the US brewing industry. Luke also founded and held executive roles in an IoT company operating in oil industry supply chains in the US. Most recently, he was head of supply chain technology and innovation at Woolies, where he was responsible for the strategy and design of their logistics executive teams. At that time, Luke was also an ASCI board member, so you all may be familiar with Luke from those days. Thanks, Luke, for your contribution. And Luke is a former Executive Council member, IoT Australia Association, a former board member for Bloombox and for Escavox, and sits on various industry bodies associated with food traceability, security and waste. So perfectly placed to address this topic today. Thank you, Luke, and over to you.
Thank you, Monique. Appreciate that, and good afternoon, everybody that's out there. These are always quite weird to do, but let's go and have the conversation. Monique, I love the work that you guys do, as you know. I'm a big fan of anybody getting educated in supply chain theory, thoughts, practices, and so on. And I think one of the outcomes of the whole 2020 crazy COVID world is you could talk about supply chains at parties now and in public, and it's suddenly become a very, very open conversation. And I'm going to guess that what we'll see over coming months and years actually is real investment in this space, because what we've actually seen is how exposed a lot of businesses are and how, frankly, how delicate a lot of their supply chains are. So I'm a big advocate for anyone educating and pushing in there. So I think things like this are really good and really helpful. So today I'm going to talk about food, and we're going to talk about food supply chains. And we're going to talk about the problem a little bit, what happens with food. We're going to talk about the theoretical solution and some of the examples of how people are starting to deploy and starting to change kind of things. For me, the conversation is important as much as the presentation. So I would urge any questions as they come through, start smashing them in there. And when we get to the end, I'm really keen to get involved in that conversation because typically we touch a lot of things and we might not cover the logical questions. So I'll be really glad to hear those questions, and know that I learn from the questions as much as you might learn from some of what we're talking about. So it's very much a chance for me to understand what's going on out there as well. So we'll get stuck into it. I'll talk about the problem solution examples. We'll come back, round it out, and then we'll hammer any questions as we go through. Firstly, though, I'm going to ask, Monique, I'm going to ask you to put the questions up on a little simple poll. And I'm going to ask you to think a little bit differently today. So could you put those questions up, Monique? That'd be good. I want you to answer these questions, not as a professional, not as a supply chain guy. I want you to answer these as a consumer. I want you to answer as the guy that walks out and buys food, because it's the one thing I can guarantee all of you buy at some point, right? And just think about these. We're not going to show the answers just yet, Monique. We'll come back to the answers. And I just want to start making you think a little bit about the food that you buy. And we'll come back and we'll look at the answers and these. You can do the other two as well, actually, Monique, while you're there. I'm going to get you to start thinking like a consumer. And really, that's how I want you to think in the first case, and then we'll flick back to some of the theory as we go on. You got the other questions there as well, Monique?
Yeah, I sure do. I'll do this one first, Luke, and then I'll do the other one, and we can share both of them when you're ready.
Okay, no problem. So let's talk about the problem. And the problem with food is this lovely word that I really enjoy. I love this word. It's called senescence, which is a very technical term for going off, for rotting. We, as animals, a desire of our cell is to eventually rot and die. We are senescent beings. An avocado is a senescent thing. A piece of meat is senescent. And senescence is a curve, and it goes from perfectly, just off the tree, and it all the way goes down, and then it goes all the way through that curve. At some point on that senescent curve, if you think about a banana, on some point it goes through an absolutely perfect point in terms of taste and texture and desire and so on. So when we talk about moving food around, what we're really doing is we're battling senescence, right? And we're just arguing, whereabouts are you on that curve? What does that look like? And are you going to be in the right place? We often think about senescence. There's the other questions. Let's answer those nice and easy. We often think about senescence as shelf life is a way that some people do it, or best before dates, or, firmness and so on. And when you look at what actually happens in the supply chain, okay, it moves through the chain. It goes from a farm at some point. Let's just take an avocado as a working example. In fact, what we're looking at here is strawberries. We have this predetermined view of what happens. I harvest the berry, I move it probably through a distribution center for a retailer, I then move it to a retail store. Eventually the consumer comes in the store, buys that and takes those strawberries home. And we have a pre-canned view of what that looks like. We've got a lot of scientists that tell us how long you can keep a strawberry, which for the record is 10 days in perfect condition. And we plan our supply chains accordingly. What we see when we actually go out there and test and actually look at this is we see all sorts of variance within the chain. Maybe the farm to DC leg takes 2 days, not 1 day. Maybe it takes 4 days, not 3. Maybe the temperature control isn't perfect. Maybe the store keeps it slightly longer because the stock control isn't quite right. What happens to that is it means we as consumers get a variable experience. And it means, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, some weeks you go in and you buy a punnet of strawberries, you take them home and they're just perfect. Other weeks you go and buy them and the next day they've turned into glorified goo and it all sort of falls apart. And we get frustrated by that. And so really what we're doing, whenever we're moving food, we're fighting and arguing with senescence. We are racing against time. And everything that you see, from packaging to fridges to cardboard to whatever it might be, really is just debating how we manipulate that curve. Freezing is just a way to really slow it down, and all these different things, they all have an impact on the food. Okay, so that's the number one problem. Food goes off. It's that simple. And we've got to think about that in the back of their heads. You just flick the slides, Emily. The second problem we've got is the complexity of our food supply chains. Now, that first chart, I drew it in a very deliberate way. People, if you've ever given a presentation about change, you've all driven it from left to right, and you draw the boxes, and it goes from here to here to here to here to here to here. What we actually know is the reality of the chain doesn't feel like that, because I might be grown in Sydney, move to Brisbane, come back to Sydney, and actually they're incredibly complicated chains. And it's almost the perfect definition of a wicked problem. It's an unsolvable problem. So we've got multiple sources of supply, multiple sources of distribution and consolidation, and multiple sources of consumption, okay? And any journey or any movement within there is adversely or is directly impacting the product quality and the consistency and everything else that comes with it. So when we want to start tracking and start managing our food, and we want to start adding these traceabilities, we've got two problems. I've got a very time and condition sensitive product, and I've got enormous complexity in our supply chain. And that complexity means I can never actually solve for it. For the mathematicians out there, it is a classic complex problem. You can't solve for it. It is constantly changing. You can't have all of the data. All you can ever do is manage it for that moment in time. It is a wicked problem. And another way of looking at this, just go next slide, please, for me. This sort of hang on, we'll get there in a second. This is the stylized view of it. So we talk about multiple growers. Think about it. Think how many farmers are out there with cattle farms. There's hundreds, thousands of them out there. They then go through an intermediary, a packer or a marketer or a supplier of some kind, a wholesaler point where we start consolidating from the farms, and we bring in, whether it's strawberries or beef or whatever it might be, we start consolidating at that level. These guys then are selling on to the retailers. And I've used retailers in here just to sort of simplify some of the model. So in this country, we've got two, but in every other country, you've probably got multiple retailers in there. And they then move on to the retail outlets, which is then ultimately onto the consumer. So very best, you've got 3-4 steps in the movement, okay? And these, because of that complex model, we create a number of different problems that are inherent within the chain. So the first one there, every touch point, every time we move one to another, this is just classic old school supply chain problem. I need to transact and I need to act. I'm either buying and selling at that point. I'm transferring custodianship. I'm transferring ownership. I've probably got paperwork. I've got a time delay, and I've got a handling cost associated with that. If I'm the grower, as soon as I send it off my farm, I can't actually see what's happening. So I've grown this perfect berry for you. I send it off. You're going to judge me as a consumer on how good that berry is. But I can't see, I can't control for what's going on there. So I'm blind to what happens down the chain, okay? I can fail at any one of those link points. I can be late, I can miss the thing, it can be closed, I can have all these different issues going on at these points. And then that creates 3 fundamental problems that we see, which we often talk about as the vaccination problem, speed camera problem, and the self-fulfilling prophecy, right? The first one's the self-fulfilling. This is the most traditional problem we see in supply chains. When I did my degree, we always used to be taught that warehousing is a sign of failure of your chain, right? Because when you're holding stock, it means you're not predicting demand clearly enough. And if you're doing that, you're incurring cost. Could be working capital, could be operating costs associated with the facility and so on. And cold chain is even more because I'm running fridges to keep it cold. Because I've got complexity and I've got multiple nodes in the chain, and because I'm typically buying and selling at each point, every single person's holding stock. So now I've got a self-fulfilling prophecy. I have to hold stock because sometimes it goes off or it degrades too quickly, or I'm not entirely sure what state it's in. Therefore, I'll hold a bit more. Because I hold a bit more, when it does go off, it starts going off even harder. So now what we've got is, because everyone's holding stock, everyone else needs to hold stock. So we have this self-fulfilling problem. So now everyone's got stock in the game. And actually in the fresh produce sector, typically people presume to write off anywhere between sort of 6 to 12% based on the product. So imagine writing 6 to 12% of your inventory off in any other line. It's kind of crazy, right? So the first thing we do is we say, okay, we want to try and reduce the working capital. We want to try and reduce these things. So let's audit it. Let's make sure it's not going off. Let's check the cold chain. Let's make sure it's all going through. And we have what we call the speed camera problem, which says, I'll scan you when you come to the back of my door. I'll scan you when you leave. I'll scan you on the way in. But if I only ever check one at a time, or I only ever check one channel, it's a bit like driving up the M1. I know that just after Mount White, there's a speed camera. So I'm going to slow down and I'll go through the speed camera at 90K, and then I put my foot back down and carry on my journey. All I've really done is I've slowed down for the 90K on there. I haven't actually fundamentally changed my behavior. So if we only ever check at disparate points, or if only one member of the chain is checking, then I've got a speed camera problem. I'm not actually getting a true view. I've got a very punitive, I'm looking into the spotlight for a problem, and I don't really change the fundamentals. And then that leads to the opposite problem, which is what we often define in our business, the vaccination problem. Well, if most people are checking and doing, and most people have got their fridges on, if most people are vaccinated, then I don't have to. I can actually afford to put some crazy stuff in to the market. I can let it push through, and you don't know whether it's good or bad or hot or cold or whatever it might be, and I can get away with that. out of all of those, so we've got the supply chain, which has got a bunch of inherent problems, and it's us, it's the customer on the far right here that pays for all of that, because we're the only guys putting money in, right? We're the only guys that are actually talking about it and doing it. So all of that loss, all of that waste, all of that inefficiency is then built in to what that consumer experience and or price and so on. So we've got this incredibly complicated chain and incredibly diverse. It's a many to many to many to many relationship, which any mathematicians out there know starts getting very funky. And it manifests itself in quality to us, and it manifests in loss ultimately. So when we talk about food waste is an outcome of an inefficient system rather than a problem in and of itself. None of us plans to waste food, whether in chain or at home, but it's normally done as a question of inefficiency. So Monique, can you just go to the next slide? So here's where we talk about just summarizing up why food chains are so odd, right? So the value, safety, quality irreversibly changes. Our product changes in the chain. Almost nothing else does. A lot of supply chain theory and a lot of conversations you see will talk to, I want to get it to the consumer on time, I want to do it the most efficiently. But if I've got a pair of jeans in China and I put it on a container and I send them to LA, it's still a pair of jeans when it arrives. Not the same for food. I get a very different outcome. Customers want consistency, and this is often a key element of quality. Just can you pull up the results now? Monique, can you put those on the screen, please?
Yeah, I sure can. For the first one on quality, let's share those results.
Oh, sorry, flick the other ones on.
Okay.
Right, it doesn't really matter, all of them. So let's have a look at this. So most people just don't know how to pick an avocado. So we love this. Everybody believes that the way they pick it is way better than everybody else, because quality is completely and absolutely subjective, okay? And there is no single way. There is no way what I like in an avocado could be completely different to Monique, could be completely different to 10 other people. So how and what's important to you is actually completely different, okay? And I've actually got these screwed up. Just go back to the other ones as well while we're here.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And what we're going to see, I'm guessing, well, we'll find out in a second, I think. Let's pull up what we think makes a good or a bad mango, okay? Just slide down. You scroll down the answers.
Yeah, can you scroll them down on your screen as well?
Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. So we got a fairly broad spread there, from firmness to color to size to weight to, now that's a pretty broad spread. What's important in a mango to some people, again, is completely different to others. I didn't even start the Kensington versus Calypso argument on this thing. The variety, the origin, the time of year, all these things are unique. What it shows is the variance. So when we talk about quality in food, it's really a very subjective thing. And what actually happens is we really start talking about the consistency. So what we typically as consumers want to know is that when I go and buy a mango from my preferred store, it always comes out the way that I know what it is. Because if it's always the same, then I know what I'm getting and I can choose whether that's a quality purchase for me or not. And just slide up one more. We'll just touch on this while we're here.
Yeah.
I'm really impressed with this. Oh, sorry, Scott, I've got to do it myself.
Yeah, that's right.
So when you look at that, what are the biggest contributors that affect food? Time and temperature. So we've got a pretty educated audience. Time and temperature are the proxies for just about every single problem in produce, whether you're meat, fish, horticulture, or anything else. Time and temperature are the biggest single factors. So at least we're getting that through. So we can close that out. So what we've got, quality is subjective. What you buy on the shelf is subjective to you. I might like really hard avocados, you might like really soft ones, okay? And then compounding the problem further, vertical integration, the standard problem to all supply chain issues and inefficiency is hard to impossible in the fresh food sector. You've got, frankly, there are something like 940 registered avocado growers in this country, and seasons move, right? And so we change where we grow things, we move them around, and our pallets change. The ability for the retailers to integrate up, which has been the traditional method, just does not exist in food, and it's just as hard for the producers to come down. And that's typically because you don't just buy avocados when you go to a supermarket. You buy avocados and pork chops and beef and cornflakes and whatever it might be. So to integrate entirely up the fresh food chain just doesn't exist. So the standard integration model just doesn't work. Those multiple points of consolidation and distribution mean we're constantly putting in and taking out. We've got all of this movement going on, and actually driven by different commercial players. So we often buy and sell at those consolidation points. Unlike many other chains, we actually transfer ownership at those points. And we're seeing increase in value because I'm getting closer to market, a decrease in value because my product's getting older and tighter. So you've got really interesting things on this. Most optimization models, which I'm sure a lot of you are very familiar with, typically focus on the asset, not the product. How hard is my truck working? How many cartons per square foot am I moving through my warehouse? What is my tons per gallon of fuel on my train set? Whatever it might be. So what we typically do when we optimize is we optimize the silo or the individual chain rather than the larger models. And when we look at inventory models, so for those purchasing and inventory managers for you out there, what you typically presume in those models is consistency of product. I've got 10 pairs of jeans and I'd rather hold 8. So when we talk about food, all of this turns on its head. So a lot of the traditional models just don't stand the test of being managed in a very professional way. So if we go to the next slide. So cool, big problem. Food's all over the world. Everybody wants it. Everybody needs it. And so how do we start solving some of this? And what we do is we change some of these things on their head, okay? The first thing we do is we talk to the food, or we listen to the food, rather than the participants or the assets that move it around. So the very first step you do is you say, is the food itself optimized for consistency or for what the producer wants to sell you? So ignore all of the truck fill, the warehouse speeds and all those things. Let's see what's actually happening to the food itself. We often talk about different supply chains, from the financial, who bought what from whom, to the digital, which is the paper trail that follows it. In this case, we have to follow the physical. You were here for this long and you're at this temperature and so on. Track time and temperature. As you guys clearly point out, time and temperature are proxies for quality and efficiency, okay? When you start tying those together from the food's point of view, not just one section, from the food's point of view, now you can start understanding the impact of the supply chain on the food, and we can start quantifying and moving that. We have to have continuous data. It has to go from the start all the way through to the finish, which for simplicity's sake, we often refer to as the supermarket shelf, but you've got to be continuous. You've got to see the whole path. And this is to stop that speed camera problem, right? I need to know your whole journey. This is why we all moved to average speed cameras rather than anything else. And then we have to consider the data from multiple angles. Everybody in that chain is going to look at it slightly differently. Sometimes I want a live decision. Sometimes I want a strategic comparison decision. Sometimes I want to score people. Sometimes I want a bit more detail, so we do all this. And this will be the one shameless plug that I put in. Can you just hit the button, please? This is why, frankly, we started Escavox. And Escavox is a horrible bastardization of a beautiful Latin language that means the voice of the food. So when we did all this work, we looked at it and said, can we do that? That's our hypothesis. If I listen to the food, if I track the time and temperature, if I'm continuous and I can manipulate that data in lots of different ways, can I make a difference to how we move food? And we're 2 and a bit years into our journey. We're working with a number of major growers, and we think we are. And I'm going to talk you through a couple of examples of things that we've done and how we've done it. And just talk about the decisions people are making and how we've started tackling this problem. Once we've done with that, we'll start getting into that. So the first one is mangoes. There's a reason I ask you about mangoes. Mangoes are fantastic, right? We're just coming into mango season. They're just starting to be harvested right now. They are, by Australian retail standards, considered a luxury item. People will pay upwards of $5, $6 per mango at some times a year, and they'll pay $5 a carton at others. Everyone, as we've just discussed, and as we've just seen on the results, is highly opinionated about what a good or bad mango is to them and what it looks like. So we've been doing, and we're halfway through a 3-year plan program with the Australian Mango Association around how to get that service better to you, because actually something like 30 or 40% of all mango buyers are disappointed with what they end up coming with at home. Okay, so when we worked with Robert and the Australian Mango Association, we said, what can we do to start changing that? It's such a sensitive item. Everyone is so opinionated about it. We've got to be able to do this. And we went back to the old, Drucker quote, what gets measured gets managed. And he came out and sort of said, this is what we need to go and do. So what we do, and I won't bore you too much with the service, we put a combination of, we use IoT devices, we use self-fulfilling devices, which are constantly on and they're constantly pinging us. Every hour they update our central server with where they are and what temperature they're at. We can talk about the technology if there's questions about that afterwards. We can get into the some nuts and bolts of that. But think of it as a little blue box pinging away, and it knows where it is, and it knows how hot or cold it is, and it tells us that, okay? And that there, so we tracked a whole bunch of mangoes last year, thousands of them. That there, just straight away, is a very simple map of all the mango movements for last summer, okay? We're just about to start this. And I don't need to go too far into the details to tell you that green is good, red is bad, and that's a direct correlation of temperature and potentially time. And just straight away, just by looking at that, I can start seeing problems with my supply chain. I can see that the leg that really goes from sort of Central Australia, Alice Springs and around there down to Adelaide, there's an awful lot of red on that channel. Something somewhere in my transport leg is not working really well for me there, okay? I've got sporadic points up near Broome, and around there, I've clearly got an issue up there, okay? I'm pretty good on the East Coast, but maybe not so good on the West Coast in terms of some of the temperature controls and what's going on. But now I can start seeing where they're going, where they're moving. We haven't put the international stuff on here, but now we can start seeing some of what's going on. So that's the first thing that we do. And then we start measuring the detail associated with that and where those problems occur. So if you can go to the next one. So what we start doing, and again, super simple example here, we start looking at where the problem actually occurs. Is it in the pack house? Is it in the inventory stage? Is it in downstream? Where did it actually occur? And this is what we found out with the mangoes. The guys on the farm, look at that green chart on the left. He's doing a really good job pre-cooling, right? He's actually pulling the field heat, as we call it. He's pulling it right down. He's doing all of the hard work there. And then look at that big red chart on the transport side. So now he's doing all this fantastic work on a farm, and then he's killing it in his truck, okay? For us as consumers, the output is essentially exactly the same. I still get a poor experience or an inconsistent experience. And what we're showing here is this break between the two. Now, when we dug into this in quite a lot of detail, because then we started looking at the carriers and so on, and there's this disconnect between what the carriers thought the temperatures should be versus to what they were actually at and how they were doing it and how they were transferring it. Because the carriers weren't deliberately making a problem here. They were just working to a different set of standards. And so the first piece of work we did with them, and we'll be looking forward to the results this year, is how to start changing their carrier network and what their vehicle temperatures when they go in, how we start extracting the heat. And what we'll see there is an uptick. All that first part of the chain will be in much better condition. So the first thing that we saw, there's your major problem. And so just by exposing simple things, where do I have my temperature breach in the chain, changes the decisions I make and the conversations I have. I phone my carrier and I say, can you do this differently? Why are you set at 8 degrees if I want you at 6? Or whatever the conversation might be. In this case, it was just around the SLA and the contract they had agreed with their carriers. And there was miscommunication on how that should be working. So we often talk about the power of data, and data's the new gold, and data's where the money's at. And these are the kind of decisions, and this is the kind of analysis that you need to do. It's very operational, and it's a very deeply controlled one. But this is the kind of analysis you need to do. Simple understanding of how to do it, direct outcome for us, the consumer. Okay, so that's case number one. Can you go forward one there, Monique? Next one we talk about is avocados, because as we just put in there, 85% of you believe that none of us know how to pick an avocado. I've learned an awful lot about avocados over the last few years, and I'm learning more every day. The evolution represents, they're a wholesaler. What they do is they buy avocados off lots and lots of small farms all over the country. They package them up and then they sell them into retailers and they export them around. They're one of the most growing and forefront of it. One of Anthony's biggest single concerns is how does he manage his quality proposition to his customers? And for that, he needs to ensure that his entire chain is correct. And so what he does is all of his farmers start tracking from point of harvest and they go all the way through the chain. Avocados are a bit like bananas. They go through a ripening curve and it's something that you can control for. You can essentially turn an avocado on, so you can hold them very cold and decide when to ripen them. And then you can control what it is when it hits the store. So now if you could pull up the next one, please, Monique. So here's a little output. Let's just talk a little bit through here what we do, because what we're going to shatter here is one of these, the faster I move it, the better it is kind of conversations. So this is just an output of a simple avocado track, and we'll just talk to it for a second. So the first thing we look at is that multicolored chart moving along there. That's the temperature trace. And I'm sure many of you have seen temperature traces from various devices and loggers over the years where we see these curves going up and down. Well, the first thing we do is we break that into the supply chain legs. This is what we call supply chain context, because it's important to know the temperature, but it's important to know it in context of where it is and should it or shouldn't be that temperature. And if you look at the chart below that where it says pack to ripen, DC, and so on, what we're starting to talk about now is where it is in the chain determines what it should or should not be. That red dotted line is, according to the avocado industry body, the optimum temperatures for that product at that time, okay? And you'll notice it changes. So when I'm in the field, so that yellow, I'm at the pack house. I've come from a field and you can see I started right at the top of the screen here, up in Atherton Tablelands probably, or Townsville by the look of it. I've come in from a field up in northern Queensland. I'm going to be hot. I'm going to be upwards of 30 degrees when I come from the field, and that's okay. My job is to drop the temperature. So you can see there, drop it right down to 10. Then I move to a ripening shed. So now we've got the first issue. I expect a certain temperature at the start of the process, but then I shift back down for the next leg of the chain. Then I go to a ripening process. Ripening is a black art for avocado producers, and I can control, and I typically take the temperatures upwards of 24 to 28 degrees based on the policy. And again, you can see I'm now changing up. And then I come back down again for when I start moving through in the supply chain again. So now I'm starting to move. Now I go from my ripening shed to a DC. DCs are allowed to hold at slightly higher temperatures, and then I go onwards into a store. If I have just a simple temperature logger, what I don't know is where I am in the chain that affects that. So there's points in my life as an avocado, I can be 20 degrees and that's fine. And there's other points that could be 20 degrees and that's dreadful. And so the journey that you take, this is this continuous journey that's important. The journey you take determines the quality that you've got. And those two red circles up there. So this avocado took 8.9 days to reach the store. And you'll see there we've got what we call a VOP, a voice of product. So what we've done, we run a bunch of algorithms that say, based on my excursions and time, start taking points off my quality. So we work to a real simple model. Presume when it's harvested, it's perfect. So what we've said in this model is you've lost 26% of your quality proposition in this journey. Now, that's quite significant. That's pretty powerful. So just by tracking and looking at that data, and I can also see, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to look at this and say, actually, I lost nearly all of that in the ripening to DC leg. You see that second gray box, because I was supposed to drop it down to 10 degrees before I put it on the truck, and I didn't. So I can tell you now, right now, the cooling process for that avocado coming out of that pack shed was the problem. So now, this is the power of data. Now I can start seeing. So now as an operator, I get to say, cool, actually my problem there is I didn't chill it properly as I took it out of the pack shed. Now that might be, the ripening shed. Maybe I didn't have time. Maybe I don't have the cooling facilities. Maybe I didn't change it, okay? So we've seen clients within this industry who look at charts exactly like that and say, well, actually it was an operational problem because my pack shed is not big enough to accommodate the throughputs that you want. Therefore, my blast chiller can't do it. Therefore, I put warm product onto a cold truck and hope to hell that the cold truck brings it down. On paper, the carrier failed. In reality, it's because we never chilled it before we put it on the truck. And that's where we start using information to make a decision. So Monique, can you just go to the next one? So here's another one, 8.8 days. Okay, so essentially exactly the same amount of time, but look at the difference in the quality. Look at the difference in our outcome as a food, right? So now I've gone through essentially exactly the same curve. I've gone from pack, I've held it there. You can see I started pretty warm in the field. I've gone through the chain. I've gone into my ripening shed. Now this guy in his ripening shed has chilled it before he put it on the truck, okay? Now, I can tell you that this is exactly the same grower and exactly the same pack shed. Okay, so it's the same grower, the same carrier, the same pack shed, the same product coming from the field. You as a consumer would have had completely different experience. So now we can see this is what should be happening. Same amount of time, but notably better product. He's lost 4% because he's managed to keep it in channels, right? So as we start applying powerful data sets, we can start challenging in this sector, maybe fast isn't the best way of doing it. Maybe I should spend a bit more time doing it. Maybe I need to control the process a little bit better. And this is where the food, the senescence, and the nature of the product has to be accommodated in our optimization algorithms when we start thinking. It's not just about my truck time. It's not just about my warehouse floor. I've got to start thinking about the consumer. Because in our first avocado there, I would have cut it open for Taco Tuesday and gone, this one's all crappy, I've got to throw that one out. So the latest market research says 50% of avocado buyers are disappointed with their purchase. 50%. Imagine any other business where half of what you sell people are upset with. And for the record, a brown on the inside of an avocado is all related to temperature in chain. Never happens on the tree. There you go. So this challenges some of the fast versus fresh. This challenges some of how do we move things. The how and when and where we place and move things can change this again. So it starts teaching us to look at things differently. And when we talk about it, and I hear it a lot of speeches in conferences and whatever, data's the new king. It's about how you use it. And then what we do, and I won't bore you with the whole lot, now I can take this for all of my avocados for a season, all of them for a channel, and start looking at that. If I'm a retailer, I can start looking at all of my different avocado suppliers. Where is it going? What's it doing? If I'm going overseas, we do the same with meat. Meat's really interesting because it has a dedicated shelf life. It's got a legal shelf life. So now, rather than just VOP, we calculate shelf life. And if I'm suddenly sitting on a boat, actually, if I can control it, I'm de-risking because I'm seeing what's going on. So Monique, can you just go to the last slide for me, please? So here's what we'll talk about. In summary, food chains are unbelievably unique because of the product, and the product is living and changing. And that change in value, as well as condition, or condition represents a change of value. It's one of the few supply chains and arenas where we as logisticians and supply chain experts can directly impact both the customer interaction and the value for the participants. And that's very, very rare. Optimization is incredibly subjective, no different to who bought the best mango, right? It is a perfect wicked problem if you study maths. All you can ever do is manage it, and to manage problems, you need information, and you typically need it in a very timely way. Continuous data is critical. I can ruin a strawberry by overheating it yesterday, but give it to you cold and you'll have no idea. We've got to stop the speed camera problem, okay? And so this continues. We've got to see the history of that data of the condition. Almost by definition, that gives us some of the traceability and all of the other things that we talk about, okay? So I'm pretty much going to stop there and just see what else we want to talk about. What else could we do? What other questions you got? Oh, in fact, just go forward. Yeah, one slide. There you go. So I think I didn't mention the word blockchain, which will be a first for anyone talking about technology and food supply. Haven't said it yet. Happy to talk about why we should or shouldn't use it and all those kind of things. We've talked a lot about data. There's probably questions around who should own it, sell it, monetize it, where is the value? Hopefully we've touched on some of that. Haven't talked about the technology. Happy to answer any of those questions as well, and some of the software side as well. So those are areas that I typically get asked questions on. Happy to answer questions on anything else.
Wonderful, Luke. Thank you so much for this presentation today. It's really got us all thinking about how unique the food chain is. We're wondering, whilst everybody gets some questions going in the Q&A box for you on these particular topics you've raised here, are there other industries that you use the same technology to apply to this?
Yeah, there are. So the same concept applies. So we do work with some manufacturers moving some raw product. Shrink wrap is particularly susceptible to heat. And so when trucks get hot, they wobble more, the pallets wobble more, and you get more damage. And so we're starting to do a lot more work with where and when are we getting damage on trucks. And because we can also measure movement as well, shock and so on. So the ability to manage and see what's going on with regard to some of the raw material and damage in transit is picking up for us. We do a lot of work with some glass bottle manufacturers and people like that with highly fragile product. We're at the early stages of pharmaceutical stuff, which is incredibly sensitive to temperature, or some of it is. That's a slightly different commercial problem. The technical problem is the same. What temperature are you at? The commercial problem is very different for pharmaceutical because the values are slightly different, and there's frankly a lot higher insurance risk if you get those things wrong. So there's a different value proposition. But yes, we are.
Questions come in here from Michael Harich, who said, yeah, can you please share the details on the technology? There had to be one. That was good.
No, it's all good. It's all good. So we'll step through. There's really two major channels to our tech. There's the hardware itself, the device, and then there's the software, and I'll just touch on both. So the hardware is we build our own devices. I spent a lot of time scanning the market, talking to just about every hardware provider out there, and couldn't quite find what we wanted. So we've got a custom-built chipset. We have temperature, humidity, light, and motion sensors integrated into our chip. We then have a bunch of location sensors in there as well. So we use a range of technologies to figure out where we are. So we sniff Wi-Fi's and we look at various other networks, and then we communicate through anything 2, 3, 4, and 5G based on where we are in the world. Those decisions, that location control is all governed by the device itself. And we can use anything from sniff the local Wi-Fi to triangulate off the local things that I go through. And then we do our backhaul data through the cell networks. That's globally enabled. So we run all the way through globally enabled SIMs to do that. On the back end, we are a very traditional Azure stack for those of you that are tech minded. We have a huge amount of processing. So we generate upwards of 2 million data points a day with our fleet. So we do a lot of back-end processing to sort of thin and cull that noise out. And then we use sounds terribly glamorous, but a self-learning AI algorithm to actually paint that story. So where you see in our software, where we break those legs of a supply chain, that's an automated process for us. Nobody's involved, nobody scans, nobody tells us. We derive that using an AI engine. So we scan for publicly known geofences, where are certain stores, DCs, and those kind of things. And then we apply some logic to back up the data on that. So software is a traditional stack, but with some very smart algorithms. And our hardware is custom built using a range of off-the-shelf devices, but plugged together in a very efficient way.
Wow, you explained technology really, even I understood some of that. David Hogg has asked you a question about smart contracts using blockchain. Could that motivate participants in the food supply chain to be more responsive to meet the required conditions that are being monitored, i.e. penalise if not meeting agreed performance?
Yes, so I'm going to get on my high horse just for a second here. I'm never short of an opinion on this subject. Smart contracts have been used and are in use millions, if not billions of times a day right now. Every significant retailer all around the world uses them right now. We've got multiple forms of EDI communication where we are submitting both delivery and purchase order instructions, and we are automating a response on whether we should or shouldn't pay against those, and then submitting payment and so on. They're well within existence, and it's worthy of mention that you don't need blockchain to fulfill a smart contract. The blockchain element is a good enabler and it gives some comfort to the value of a smart contract, but they don't necessarily have to exist together. So look at Woolies, Coles, Aldi, any of these big guys, every day, nearly all of their invoices are processed using what we would consider a smart contract. So is there a motivation to go do that? Absolutely. Because as soon as you come down one tier in terms of scale and size, the real value of the smart contract and the blockchain piece is what it allows me to do is have a smart contract with somebody that I don't know. And what the blockchain does is it gives me, in theory, some comfort that what I'm getting told is true and valid. So we work with a bunch of other providers. So my data doesn't sit on a blockchain because there's no value in us doing that. However, there are a bunch of blockchain providers who take some of our data and put it onto blockchains to allow that to enable. So conceptually, yes, but what we've got to do is answer the why do I want to do it question before we go and solve the technology. The technology exists, the blockchains exist, that's all capable. What you've got to do is find the reason to do it. And the biggest single reason is really what we see is about shortening payment terms so I can improve my working capital position. And in all honesty, you can achieve a lot of that by having the right conversation with your supplier and or your provider to achieve that. So do I see it growing? Absolutely. I don't see it as the panacea that it's often talked about. I think we're evolving towards it.
Yeah, because I think David's example, can you penalise if not meeting agreed performance? But again, you can go back to collaboration and talking through the problem. So
and that exists now. We all have SLAs with our carriers, with our warehouse guys, with our providers. It's a way of automating and experiencing that faster. That's a conversation on how you choose to do business rather than a technology question. 3
minutes left. There's 2 questions. Are ROI or return on investment numbers supporting this detailed management?
Yes, they are, in very simple terms, because we solve 2 problems. We solve operational problems through lack of rejection and lack of wasted capital, and we're supporting significant capital investment. So the reason I know that is because our business is growing about 30% month on month right now. But yes.
Would this work for a global supply chain? Because you've mentioned 2 Australian case studies. So one question is, can you use the devices on aircrafts, battery related?
Yes, I can use devices on aircraft, and yes, we do. And the Australian food supply chain is a global supply chain. We provide arguably the best beef in the world to the world, and all of the current meat clients track this around the world. It is arguably a much stronger ROI than domestic.
Great. And lastly, there's a question here about the feedback loop between the customer and the retailer, and do you tap into that?
We don't, because that is not our relationship to own or tap into. We are the providers of the information that allow the retailer to make those decisions. So we are a data provider, and we enable that data for the producers and or the retailers. How they choose to use and manipulate and leverage that data for their best use is for them to use. So we have, as a business, deliberately stayed out of that relationship because the consumer-retailer relationship, frankly, is how retailers make their money. We are there to provide information to enrich that process for them.
Yeah, sure. And just lastly, thank you so much, Luke. And it's been great having you on our webinar program. We hope you come back for some more, either as an attendee or on a panel. You got a lively discussion going, so that was great.
Love it. Find me any questions, Luke at escovox.com. Happy to talk about it all day. I'm a supply chain nerd and wonderfully happy in this industry.
Well, you're in very good company there. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining, everyone. And you'll see that there is another webinar next week, quite a different topic in the sense that it's a different industry, focusing on the mining industry, and that will be hosted by our Western Australian chapter. So head over to our events section on our website and register to that, both on our website, but also in the Zoom link that's there. And we'll see you again next week. Thanks, Barbara, and thanks, Luke.
Thanks, guys.
And bye, everybody.